Well, surprise, surprise. The left once again has a little temper tantrum, this time over the Supreme Court's recent 9-0 decision saying that, well, Trump can't just be randomly kicked off the ballot at state will. Also, we'll discuss the recent FACE Act farce prosecutions and the problems this illustrates for the rest of the country, and how all of this can be fixed by returning to the social kingship of Christ as described by Pius XI in the encyclical Quas Primas. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Delenda Est. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Delenda Est podcast, episode 77. Can you believe it already? Where boomer conservatism goes to die and Christ reigns supreme. As you can see, today I am not in my usual studio. I am on the road coming to you live from my parents' basement. But don't let that stop us. Seb, take it away. Tell us about Keith Olbermann.
All right, thank you, Stephen. As you can see, I am in fact in my normal studio, and like we said last time, we are back in purple. That's right, liturgical coloring will continue until morale improves. Okay, let's get started. So, as you mentioned, we had a little bit of a meltdown recently over the recent Supreme Court decision. Were we surprised? No, we were not. Some people perhaps were. People had some interesting reactions. You know, it's a great time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about it. I want to start by just kind of laying out basically what happened here. So essentially what happened is we had a 9-0 decision on the Supreme Court. Now, for those of you who might not know, the Supreme Court has 9 justices on it, which means it was unanimous. No one said no, right? And what this decision did essentially was reverse a decision by the Colorado Supreme Court to remove Donald Trump from the ballot for the general election in November in Colorado. And that case was basically referencing the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment. Okay, so that's sort of the facts of what was going on. And the Supreme Court unanimously said basically, no, that's not going to happen, right? So people were upset about this. You know, they said, look, we want to be able to remove people from ballots whenever we want. And the Supreme Court said you can't do that, and they got upset about it. All right. I think it's kind of funny, mostly. Some people didn't think it was funny. One of those people was Keith Olbermann. Now, we haven't talked about him before on the podcast, mostly because he hasn't really been relevant in at least a decade, probably more.
Yeah, I don't even remember him.
And I didn't know anything about. I think the first time I heard of Keith Olbermann was when Ben Shapiro dressed up as him for Halloween, which was pretty funny. A little weird, but, you know, to each his own. So Keith Olbermann was relatively upset about this Supreme Court decision. So I'm gonna go into kind of his take on the Supreme Court and how accurate or not accurate it might be. So right here we have some tweets by Keith Olbermann. Okay, so this is where we get into our Twitter dive. Right, we're going into the Twitterverse, the cutting edge of political discourse in this country. All right,
always edifying.
So Keith Olbermann tweets this in the wake of the Supreme Court decision. Quote, the Supreme Court has betrayed democracy. Lowercase d in that democracy. I'm surprised he didn't capitalize it. We really should be more respectful. Its members, including, no comma there, by the way, its members, including Jackson, Kagan, and Sotomayor, who, for those of you who don't know, are 3 liberal justices on the court, have proved themselves inept at reading comprehension. So he's saying they don't know how to read? Interesting take. Okay. And collectively, the court has shown itself to be corrupt and illegitimate. Period. Enter key. It must be dissolved. Period. So that's his take. He thinks it should go away. Stephen, thoughts on this tweet?
I don't know where to start, honestly. I mean, first of all, let's look at it. Must be dissolved. That's a hot take. You know, that's just doing away with the highest court of the
drastic,
land.
Maybe.
Yeah. But I think this shows a classic divide between the smart leftists and the leftists en masse who can't think ahead of the next 5 minutes, honestly. So here we have Justin, Kagan, and Sotomayor siding with the conservative, whatever that means, court in saying that Trump can't just be kicked off the ballot because of a state's interpretation of the 14th Amendment. Do the leftists en masse not realize, like, Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson likely do they not realize that if the decision went the other way, then Republican states would just start randomly kicking off Democrat challengers all over the place? I mean, they just can't see ahead of Trump. Like they can't see ahead of the next 5 minutes. And I think,
Yeah, I think we can say the Trump derangement syndrome strikes again on that one. But you were saying,
right. No, I think it's a case of Trump derangement syndrome for sure. I think it's also just a case of people not being able to think ahead of the next 5 minutes. I think Jackson, Kagan, and Sotomayor, they probably all have severe cases of Trump derangement syndrome, but they at least, I think, they're onto the Supreme Court. Probably could say that they're generally somewhat intelligent people. They probably realize that if they had voted the other way, or if the court had decided another way, then all hell would break loose. And they wouldn't want that, because they at least play a somewhat longer game, which I don't think any leftist understands. The real leftists know that this is more than just Trump.
Right. I think you could say there was kind of some forethought, maybe even some discourse going on between those three justices. That was not the only discourse going on, however, because on Twitter, we had Keith Olbermann getting into some discourse of his own. So what happens is he posts this tweet here, right? And then someone responds, Gunther Eagleman, TM, trademark, blue check mark. I don't know who this guy is. I don't think he's terribly famous or anything. I could be wrong. Maybe he's really famous and I'm just ignorant. The point is, he responds to Keith Olbermann saying, cry more, ellipsis, 9-0. Boom, got him, wrecked.
Yeah,
right.
No comeback.
Classic Twitter, just comes right to him. I mean, like, look, there's nothing you can do at that point. You got to just hang up your gloves. You've been owned, right? However, Keith was not about to go down without a fight. Okay, Keith responds with what may honestly be the most befuddling Twitter response I've ever seen, and I haven't been on Twitter for a super long time, but I've seen some pretty interesting things.
Yeah.
This might just take the cake. So he responds with this absolute, just gem of political discourse. Here we go. Keith Olbermann, what a guy. He responds with, and I quote, those aren't tears, comma, capital F, fascist, period. They're urine, period. I'm sure you enjoy being bathed in it, period.
I mean,
I got nothing.
It's obviously an allegory of some sort, right?
There's got to be some kind of deep esoteric knowledge here that I'm just not aware of. I mean, I'm a Straussian, but this is too esoteric even for me. There's got to, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I've been spending days trying to figure this out. The best I can think of is maybe it's a sort of scenario with, don't P word on my leg and tell me it's raining, but it's on his face.
I'm just confused because it means he's secreting urine out of his eyes. It's got maybe a commentary on. Here's what I can say. The closest I can come to deciphering this brilliant Shakespearean rhyme from Mr. Olbermann here is, I think the only other analogy involving urine and fascists I can think of in somewhat recent American political discourse is, if you remember, there was a rumor, wildly unsubstantiated, back during the Trump hunt of the Mueller days, the Russia collusion thing. There was some rumor, like there's a video of like Trump having to drink urine with Russian prostitutes or something. I don't know if you remember this.
No, but I bet Keith Olbermann
one
does.
Of the wild things circulated. I'm sure he remembers it maybe too well. I don't know. And I know, the Trump fascist connection is very, that's a big Olbermann favorite. So maybe that's the connection. I still don't really see how the train's getting from point A to point B on that.
Right.
But maybe I'm just not enlightened enough to understand what's going on here. I'm not sure.
We can never have hope, honestly.
Yeah, I've got nothing. So that's our Twitter take of the day. Keith Olbermann, ladies and gentlemen. Round of applause. Yeah, I think, if anything, to kind of zoom out from that for a minute, because I got nothing on it. To zoom out from that, I think it really just it's a nice example of just what an insanely chaotic state our civil discourse, or lack thereof, is in this moment. You have these kind of exchanges that are going on. And by the way, this is not shocking. This is not surprising. This is like average Twitter tier exchange, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not like, oh, he said something vulgar. It's like, you should log into Twitter for more than 2 seconds, and there's way worse stuff out there. I just think it's interesting. I mean, the follow-ups are more hilarious. I think the more insightful almost tweet is the original one, where you just basically, we need to dissolve the Supreme Court because I didn't get what I want. Right. That's, I think, what's more insightful as to what's the current state of things in this country.
Yeah, and it shows that people really have just a complete unwillingness to speak in terms other than absolutes. He doesn't propose even any Supreme Court reform. He doesn't propose any new ideas. He's just like you said, I didn't get what I want. I want the whole thing completely gone. All of it. And then, you might have conservatives on the other side come at him and say, no, the Supreme Court is totally awesome and there's nothing ever wrong with it. And also, we have to worship the Constitution. There's no, Twitter is just a breeding ground for absolute polarization.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to actually summarize it. Is Twitter is essentially political discourse concentrated to the most extreme takes on either side.
Yeah.
And since most of our discourse now occurs on Twitter, we're basically just seeing it become extremeness. Extremeness, is that a word? Doesn't matter. Extremeness only on either side, essentially. I think that's a consequence of many things, but it's certainly a problem in our current political environment.
Right.
Are you tired of struggling with problems in the church? Do liberal excesses in the clergy and at the Vatican annoy you? Are you really tired of having to put any real effort into remaining faithful in times that can be challenging for the church? Boy, oh boy, do we have a philosophy for you. Sedevacantism. With Sedevacantism, you can simply blame all problems on the modernists. You can rage on the internet with no consequences. After all, there's no rules or hierarchy to bend your will to. With Sedevacantism, you can simply say a random thing, say it's the fault of the modernists, and you're good to go. No more pesky bishops, no more pesky Vatican, no more pesky anything except those other Sedevacantists who might slightly disagree with you, but that's not important. What is important is the fact that you don't really have to put effort into Catholicism anymore. All you have to do is find a random chapel and become informed. How are you going to become informed? By going to newvatican.com. Newvatican.com is the #1 website for Sedevacantist Catholics on the internet. On this website, you can find information and downloadable PDFs on how to argue like a true Sedevacantist. For more information, go to www.newvatican.com and use promo code DelendaEst. NewVatican.com is owned and operated by Unemployed Traditionalists Incorporated. All products and publications available through New Vatican are property of UTI. The views and positions of authors published on New Vatican do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of UTI. See site for full legal details.
On the note of politics, there's been a lot of talk about the FACE Act lately, with some people facing up to 11 years of prison for violations of the FACE Act, and this mostly has to do with protesters outside abortion clinics singing hymns and apparently being a threat to our sacred democracy, TM, or something like that. But anyway, let's take a look at what the FACE Act actually said. So this is the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. It's a statute that was passed in 1994 during the Bill Clinton years. And we're just going to read through a couple bits of the text that are more or less in question. So Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 248, Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances. So essentially, this punishes, quote, whomever, I guess in this instance, whomever by force or threat of force or by physical obstruction intentionally injures, intimidates, or interferes with, or it attempts to injure, intimidate, or interfere with any person because that person is or has been, or in order to intimidate such person or any other person of any class of persons from obtaining or providing reproductive health services. And basically, whoever does that is a bad boy and might face up to a year in prison for the first violation, or up to 3 years for the second violation, various fines, essentially. And before we leave off on the actual language of the statute, I want to highlight the definitions of intimidate and interfere. So we have all the way under here, under Section E, definitions. Interfere with means to restrict a person's freedom of movement. So there's an actual physical restriction of the person's freedom of movement. Intimidate means to place a person in reasonable apprehension of bodily harm to him or herself or to another. So essentially, these prosecutions against pro-lifers are saying that they are physically restricting the freedom of movement to people trying to get into abortion clinics, which may happen in some cases, maybe, but definitely not in all of them. I believe there's one in Tennessee where that did not happen, absolutely. And in fact, this state police force didn't arrest him, if I remember correctly. So either physically trying to interfere with that person's freedom of movement or placing a person in reasonable apprehension of bodily harm to him or herself. I'm not sure that's ever happened at an abortion protest. It certainly is not the norm. So that's essentially the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. And this is being more or less weaponized against pro-life protesters because the Biden DOJ is taking and running with that language, in my opinion, against the actual construction of the language itself as specified in the statute to put these guys in prison. But I think maybe the legal thing that we should be taking a little bit more of a closer look at is the actual conspiracy against rights charge. And that's a different statute. And you hear about these people facing up to 11 years in prison. That's actually, most of that's coming from a different statute called the Conspiracy Against Rights statute, which is U.S. Code Section 241, Title 18. And that says if two or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise and enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or because of his having so exercised the same, will be subject to various penalties, including up to 10 years in prison. That's where actually most of the prison time is coming from. So they're saying that these people are interfering with fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution or laws of the United States. First of all, Dobbs v. Jackson says that abortion is not a federally guaranteed right. Also, the list of prohibited actions include injuring, oppressing, threatening, or intimidating people. And injuring and oppressing, I'm pretty sure these pro-life people are not injuring people. Oppressing, probably hard to make that argument as well. Threatening, I doubt that's happening universally. Intimidating, as defined in the other statute, means to place a person in reasonable apprehension of bodily harm to him or herself or to another. That, again, is a physical problem, like a bodily harm thing. Basically, what all this is telling me is that the vague language in some cases of these statutes is totally being weaponized, maybe even against the intent of the original statutes themselves against these pro-lifers.
Yeah, I think that's just the point of it. I think that's really what it gets down to, actually, is kind of here's the thing, to kind of back one step up, basically. If we're going to be real, the entire FACE Act was designed to prosecute pro-life demonstrators, people outside abortion clinics, right? There was a bone thrown to, GOP members in the legislature, say, oh, it's going to apply to, crisis pregnancy centers, things like that. That's never happened. It's happened once in 3 years. We've had hundreds upon hundreds of attacks on churches and pregnancy centers and those kinds of places. Yeah. So this was obviously designed from day one. It was designed to go after the pro-life people. Everyone knows this. No one's pretending otherwise, right? And I think the weaponized ambiguity in the language is a favorite term of mine, weaponized ambiguity. I think it applies really well here, right? We're talking about oppression and harm, and it really comes down to lawyerly arguments and how the judge feels, how the jury feels, right? There's a lot of wiggle room for a DOJ that right now has a lot of interest in aggressively prosecuting these people. And I think, to kind of back up from the legal angle for 1 second, it's something that is one, it really indicates how radical the left has become in this country and how determined the current DOJ is to enforce that narrative. And I think it's really, despite what it's saying in the letter of the law and whether or not it's adhering to the intention of the, initial language in the document, the point is, we had a father of 11 have, armed and armored FBI agents at his door, in front of his wife and children being hauled off to prison, right? For being outside of an abortion center
Right.
praying and singing hymns, right?
Right. And this was, if I remember correctly, like
that's really
6
what it's about.
months after the incident in question with no warning.
Right. Yeah, there was no summons to appear. There was nothing. He said he talked with the police on the day that it happened. Some people got arrested for trespassing, even though if you actually look into that case, the owner of the property never told them they weren't welcome, so they actually can't really be accused of trespassing. They were bailed out. Those charges were basically dismissed. Everyone goes home to think it's over. 6 months later, knock knock, the feds are at your door, right? All of a sudden your children are in the yard and ready to go to school, and now they're being armored. They're being guarded by an FBI agent with an M4, right? That's scary. That's terrifying, right? I mean, you're there with your family, and now the feds are knocking on your door, right? And to me, I mean, it gets down to the fact it's obviously about sending a message. It's obviously about showing the right in this country that we will go after you. We will prosecute you for, standing up and holding the line in this fight. And I have to say, it was a sobering, moment for me reading into this. I mean, I don't know about you, I've knelt and prayed outside abortion clinics before.
Yes, have I.
And I've had nasty things yelled at me, lots of nasty things. I've had many middle fingers extended in my direction. I've, heard lots of mean things. I've never been physically assaulted or anything like that. Although I did think, how hard would it be for some guy who just really doesn't like me to just jerk his wheel driving by? But I was never assaulted or anything like that. But I did think, like, there are cameras out there. I'm sure I'm on camera somewhere. Does this mean that randomly, knock, knock, the feds are at my door,
Right. And the fact that they're giving
which is
you to
basically
think that means that they're already
right,
making progress.
which of course is the entire notion. The entire notion is to put the idea in someone's head of now, okay, the mom who's, maybe college age kids are going to go have a habit of maybe going with their college classmates. Like I know some people at some Catholic colleges I know will go and do this, to go pray outside abortion clinics. All of a sudden, she's saying, what if I get a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation that they have my children in custody, right? Now all of a sudden the, dad who might stop and pray for 20 minutes on his way home from work is thinking, what if I don't get to come home that day because I get pulled off into a van, right? Now, here's the thing. People might say, okay, that's fear mongering. This stuff isn't going to happen. Maybe it is. The point though, is that people are now thinking this, and that's the entire point. It's about sending a message.
Exactly.
It's about sending a message that this is what we're willing to do to protect this alleged constitutional right to abortion, which is really a non-existent constitutional right based in another non-existent constitutional right. It's a total legal fiction, as you pointed out, and as was most recently demonstrated with the Dobbs v. Jackson case.
Right.
But I think it really indicates, again, coming off what we opened with, just how radical things have become in this country, right? I mean, how just absolutely fixated the left is on continuing its march. And it leads to a point that I kind of want to close this segment with, and that will continue in our next segment. And that is to say, essentially, we have this utter lack of response in kind from the right. Okay. And what I mean by that is the left is essentially, goes from basically, oh, just, let us have gay marriage with, Obergefell in 2015 till, if you don't let us have drag shows in front of your kindergartners, you're a fascist, right? I mean, that's where we've gone, right? And in the same thing, we go from safe, legal, and rare, right, the language of Hillary Clinton, to, if you try to obstruct abortion up until and after birth, we will throw you in prison for 10 years, right? We have the Overton window going all the way. Actually, go this way, right, going to the left.
The slippery slope is real.
Exactly. The slippery slope fallacy that isn't a fallacy. Yeah, the thing that never happens is happening again.
Right.
And what we have by the right in response is nothing, right? There's no real movement by mainstream political forces on the right wing of politics in this country to move the Overton window in the other direction.
Right.
We see fringes of this culturally on the new right. I'm starting to see it. I'm very encouraged by it. People like the post-liberal movement, or kind of the, Claremont people on the edges of the newer, younger right, who are basically saying, the GOP of 2012 is dead, it's not coming back, things like that.
Right.
But really, there's no concerted political effort. And I think the main reason for that is because conservatives have nothing that they agree on that they want to work towards, right?
Right.
I've said this before here when I say that basically the conservative coalition is basically united by nothing other than a desire to move toward godless modernism at a slightly slower pace than the left.
Right.
Emphasis on slightly, right? And really, it's because we don't really have any actual, real first principles that we want to get back to in the mainstream political right. Okay. Now, can we fix that problem? I think we can, which is what we're going to talk about in the next segment. Are you tired of being able to focus when you pray? Hollow is the #1 app for distracting you while you are communing with our Lord. With Hollow, you can have various distractions pumped directly into your ears via headphone while you pray, whether it's distracting baby noises in the background, annoying people clinking their rosary on the pew in front of them, or even old people whispering at something that's not quite a whisper about something you're not quite sure about but in the pew behind you. With Hollow, we have various distractions available so you can really learn to persevere through distraction. Alternatively, with our easy mode, you can have guided prayer through every single facet of prayer. And what we mean by that is quite simple. Instead of actually having to make interior effort on your part, you can have various external factors pushing you along the way, resulting in a lack of spiritual development. This sounds good to you? Then go to hollow.com and use promo code DelendaEst.
The Hollow app is owned and operated by Neocons of America Incorporated. Any products, licensing, or marketing materials associated with the Hollow brand are owned by NAI. The statements and positions of individuals on the Hollow app do not necessarily reflect the views and positions of NAI. See site for full legal details.
All right. So, as promised, we are going to look at kind of some solutions we could have to this lack of coherent moral vision on the right. And there's a particular document I want to look at regarding this issue, and that is the encyclical, which I actually have printed off here. That's right, I did my homework, folks. The encyclical Quas Primas, promulgated by His Holiness Pope Pius XI on December 11th of 1925, which was a holy year. So what this encyclical does is, this was the establishment of the Feast of Christ the King into the calendar, into the liturgical calendar, okay? And just to kind of give a brief overview of what's going on here. So Pius XI in 1925, right, he institutes this feast, and he institutes it to take place on the last Sunday of October, okay? And now in the new calendar, it's celebrated on November 24th. So in the old calendar, it's celebrated on the last Sunday of October, which both of us, that's when we observe it in our respective parishes. And the reasoning for that is actually given in the document, which I'm going to read for y'all now. So Pius XII, not the 12th, the 11th, excuse me, both great guys though. Pius XI says, quote, "The last Sunday of October seemed the most convenient of all for this purpose, because it is at the end of the liturgical year, and thus the feast of the kingship of Christ sets the crowning glory upon the mysteries of the life of Christ already commemorated during the year." Okay, and it's also the Sunday which immediately precedes the Feast of All Saints, right? So there's kind of this dual significance going on there.
Right.
And something that was interesting to me reading through this was when talking about the establishment of the feast and why this feast is being established in this way, in this time, this manner, he draws constantly on evidence from Scripture for the temporal kingship of Christ, on evidence from various liturgical sources, and then he, interestingly, he really takes a lot of pains to discuss why it's sort of right and just for him to implement this feast at this moment in the church. And he goes into saying, like, we had the Feast of the Precious Blood instituted at this time for these reasons. We had the Feast of Corpus Christi instituted at this time for these reasons. He doesn't just say basically, I wanted this feast, and so now we have it, right? There's a lot of reasoning behind it. And one of the reasons, another note actually I want to get to, one of the reasons he gives for the implementation of the feast is he draws from evidence given in the liturgy, right? For he says the kingship of Christ, is proved in Scripture, it's proved by history, for X, Y, and Z reasons. But he also basically says, one of the reasons he gives is, Christ is referred to in this kingly liturgy in the sacred liturgy, in our sacramentals, in both the East and the Western liturgies, and this has happened for a long time. And I wanted to point that out because it's a great example of, one, the lex orandi, lex credendi, right? And two, this kind of great indicator that the liturgy is what we draw from, right? We don't take outside things and then say, well, that means we should do the liturgy this way. We say, we're thinking of doing this. Let's look to the liturgy for our guide, right? It's this very kind of, there's a sense that the Pope is not going in and saying, I want to do this, I'm going to do it. He says, okay, I'm going to look at these things, and these have proved to be beneficial, so we're going to do this, right? And the liturgy
Right.
is what guides us, okay? Can you tell I like liturgy, right?
Right. Well,
So,
he's extrapolating from the tradition of the church. He's not really creating anything new. And I think that's why he goes into such great pains to explain why he is doing what he's doing.
right, it's very much an organic process. Exactly. So really, so to kind of make a final note and wrapping up the introduction here, and then I'll let Stephen take it away with some thoughts. What he says he's addressing here is one, he says the fact that basically most men and nations have rejected Christ from the public life and from
Yeah.
their private lives, but also from their public life. They don't see any place for Christ and his church in government, in public policy, in public culture, in public spaces, public events, government ceremonies, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then two, he says it's the implementation of this feast is to counter the rise in anti-clericalism, right? Which is a movement that has probably reigned triumphant for some time in the church. Maybe not as bad now as it was, but definitely got worse from the time of Pius XI before it got better. So he definitely was correct in seeing this problem rising and becoming worse. So that's kind of the background of the context for this encyclical. And again, I think probably y'all can already see what pertinence it has to what we've been talking about during the rest of the show. So, Stephen, take it away. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I think what's interesting is Pius XI very explicitly makes this not just a spiritual issue, but also an inherently political issue. And I think that's something that I think a lot of maybe more in general, I think Catholics have forgotten about this idea that Christ's kingship is a political issue. And he makes it very unambiguous that this is basically what we're looking for here is a public reverence toward toward Christ as king. So there's a continual emphasis on the universal duty to reverence Christ. So at one point he says Christ is to be adored by angels and men. To him as man, angels and men are subject and must recognize his empire, unquote. Those are pretty strong words, and it denotes not just a spiritual domination, but also a temporal, tangible domination of Christ that we have to recognize. He says that although Christ's kingdom is spiritual, it still has authority in civil affairs, and it doesn't. Which is interesting is it doesn't matter if the nation is Catholic or not. It doesn't matter what people think. This is just a universal truth that he does have authority in civil affairs. He also says that this reverence must be public and it must be practiced by civil officials. Over and over again throughout this encyclical, he says that this is a political issue, and I think we've totally lost sight of that as Catholics today in a lot of ways. But what I find, one more thing, he also emphasizes that the universal kingship of Christ is the key to world peace, not just coexisting. And I think not only have Catholics kind of forgotten about this in general, but also just the world at large seems to think that there's this nebulous realm of utopian coexistence that we can all just agree on certain, quote, fundamental issues, and then we just live life. And that's not what Pope Pius XI is saying here. He's saying that's wrong. And really, in order to get world peace, we have to have the universal kingship of Christ established throughout the globe. But what I think is really interesting is the rhetoric that Pius XI uses to convey this message. So it's at least to me, it's very clear that he's specifically targeting the American democratic philosophical political tradition. So at the very beginning of the encyclical, he explicitly gives he doesn't give, but he ascribes tripartite governmental power to Christ. He says Christ has complete authority over the legislative, judicial, and executive branches of government, almost in so many words. I mean, he literally uses those words, I believe, which is really interesting that he goes straight from the jugular there. And later on in the encyclical, if I can find the page here, he makes a really interesting point. He says, and I quote, "Our Lord's regal office invests the human authority of princes and rulers with a religious significance. It ennobles the citizen's duty of obedience. It is for this reason that St. Paul, while bidding wives revere Christ in their husbands and slaves respect Christ in their masters, warns them to give obedience to them not as men, but as the vice-regents of Christ. For it is not meet that men redeemed by Christ should serve their fellow men, unquote. This is a really interesting point because he's essentially making the argument that human rights as humans as redeemed by God are of such innate dignity that they actually shouldn't be serving other men. And this is how he said this. And he says the only reason that civil authority has any legitimacy is because it's endowed with spiritual power by God. So he's almost making a human rights argument for the right of Christ to rule over the entire earth, which is really interesting here. He's really playing into the modern rhetoric and definitely the American kind of political tradition. And then later on, what's also interesting is he continues to work this language of rights. He goes kind of full send into what he calls the rights of Christ, which is, in my opinion, just excellent. So we always think of human rights. And I think it's still at this point, maybe, Seb, most Christians most Americans are still Christian. I think theoretically that's the case.
There is still, I think, a straight majority Christian. Yeah, I think it's like 58%, 58,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
How many of those people do you think always think about human rights, but then never think about the rights of any created or uncreated beings above us? So we think about human rights. Do you ever think about the rights of God or, of angels or any of those kinds of things? Do they have rights too? Pius XI, as far as God is concerned, says absolutely. God has rights. And those rights are to rule over the entire world, right? In not only just a spiritual sense, but also a political sense. And then toward the very end, he says the Catholic Church has a natural and inalienable right to perfect freedom and immunity from the power of the state, unquote. He's literally quoting the Declaration of Independence. This is amazing.
You'll love to see it. You'll love to see it.
Right.
See, the Constitution's so great. Even Pius XI loved it, guys. Come on. It's amazing.
So I think
I think you're absolutely right in that. Yeah.
Right. It shows that Pius XI is specifically thinking about America, and he's seeing a problem. And the problem is kind of this American indifference toward religion that was really taking off, in the early 20th century. Obviously, we've seen the effects of that play out today. But he's specifically thinking about America. He's using the tripartite nature of government. He's talking about natural and inalienable rights. I mean, these are notions that the Republic was founded on. So I think this is really incredible rhetoric and a very solid argument. So, as created beings, human beings have rights. But as an uncreated being, God has the ultimate right, and that is to be dominant. It's not only a right, it's just the way he is, right? He has that control over everything, and we have to recognize it. So just a really solid, interesting
something
take.
that I wanted to kind of go off of that with, and it's a great kind of summary there. But of course, Pius XI does say basically when he's enumerating the basically means by which Christ is entitled to his kingship, when he says basically by natural right, for he is our creator. Is the quote actually there?
Right.
Really just point out the fact that it is basically by his nature, right?
Right.
It is something, and we could say that even God, qua God, has that right, by merit of his divine nature, of his divine substance, right? So something I actually wanted to touch on to kind of tie this into what we were talking about before is these two quotes that Pius XI uses here, and this kind of speaks to kind of the moral ambiguity on the right currently and why that's a problem. So he's talking about basically the kingdom of God, right, and the temporal kingdom of Christ, okay?
Right.
And he says, quote, "This kingdom is opposed to none other than to that of Satan and to the power of darkness," close quote. Right? And he's just drawing the lines there, okay? He says this, this is the way it is. It was very stark. It reminds me of a great, analogy or image that actually St. Ignatius of Loyola draws at the beginning of his spiritual exercises. We see the army of Christ and the army of Satan, Jerusalem and Babylon. And he's really saying, okay, this is it. This is the temporal kingdom of Christ against Satan and his companions, okay?
Right.
This is what it is. if that's not something that should make people on the right realize, okay, we need to be taking definite steps in a direction away from where the left is going, I don't know what's gonna, stir
Right.
them to that. Now, Pius XI also gives guidelines basically for Catholics, for citizens of Christ's temporal kingdom, right? He says, quote, "They must hunger and thirst after justice," right, quoting the Beatitudes there, "and more than this, they must deny themselves and carry the cross," close quote, right? So I think it really sums it up. One, hunger and thirst for justice, desire for these things. You need to want these things to happen, right? I think we have plenty of that on the right, honestly. I mean, obviously you have kind of your centrist, your country club GOP people, but I think you have a lot of people on the young right who
The 2012
I really wish
GOP
things could be
is.
better. Right, exactly. Yeah. I really wish, things would be better. I really wish that I didn't have to have drag queen story hour at my preschool. I really wish I didn't have to put up with Hamas protests on my college campus, But he says, okay, what do you do about it? Well, you don't go riot and burn buildings. You deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow Christ, right? That's what you do. Does it sound cliche that the answer is like, deny yourself, pray, follow Christ, be a good Catholic? It maybe is cliche, but it happens to be the right answer.
Right. Right.
We know how this is. Again, it's, I kind of want to close this off by just, basically summarizing real quickly. As we know as Catholics, we are in a war in which we know the outcome. Okay, we know who's going to win in the end, right? Our Blessed Mother's told us, "My Immaculate Heart will triumph," right? We know that Christ wins in the end. What we don't know is the casualty rate. Okay, we don't know how many KIA this war is going to have, right? And that's really what we have to concern ourselves with. We have to concern ourselves: where am I going? Where are the people around me going? Where's my family going? Where's my community going? What can I do to help other people, right? To help society generally move toward embracing the social kingship of Christ. And so I'm going to hand it to you to kind of tie this off in a nice knot here. But before we do that, actually, we forgot at the top of this segment to give our typical disclosure, okay, when we talk about theological things, which is to say, on this podcast, we are not speaking ex cathedra as the vicar of Christ. Okay, we are speaking in the same capacity as Pope Francis in an airplane interview on the way back from Africa. That is to say, fallible. Okay, that's complimenting the Holy Father, by the way. Okay, that's saying stop yelling at him for random things he said in an airplane. Okay, so we are not infallible. We are not cardinals. We are not priests. We are not bishops. Neither of us right now has anything more advanced than a bachelor's degree in anything. Okay, so
Right.
all that to say, don't at me in the comments, okay? These are just two laymen trying to be faithful Catholics and trying to help others do the same, okay? Stephen, wrap it up for us.
Absolutely. And I think what you were saying just now reminds me of a great line from Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy. And for all those of you out there who maybe for some reason, I guess this is conceivable in some universe, don't like the Batman movies, get used to it because I love them. But in the first movie, Rachel turns to Bruce Wayne and asks what
we're going to start keeping a tally on the show of how many times Stephen has quoted the Batman trilogy because it's a lot. Anyway, continue.
As I was saying, don't at me in the comments. But what chance does Gotham have when the good people do nothing? And I think Pius XI is more or less echoing the same, or I guess not echoing, but he's the initiator of that kind of mentality in Catholics, saying you have to actually do something if you want things to change. But essentially, even if for all your non-Catholic listeners out there, even if you don't agree with the substance of what Pius XI is saying here, you do have to at least admit that it's logically consistent. And this is what I think we have a hard time with in the 21st century. We just like to pretend that everything can make sense while you have people holding completely contradictory worldviews. So he believes, and I happen to agree as a Catholic, as I'm sure Seb agrees, that Pius XI is in possession of the truth, that Christ and God is supreme over the entire universe, and that ultimately what that means, logically speaking, is that all must ultimately bow to the truth and to God. And that's just the long and short of it. Like, there is no logical inconsistency there, and Pius XI is laying that out for us right here in 11 pages that you can download off the Vatican website. It's that simple. And I think we need to really return to that simplicity of thought and consistency.
Are you worried about dying one day? Well, you should be, because you're going to. One day you will die and the world will go on without you. And what you need is a life insurance company that doesn't try to tell you otherwise. Grim Reaper Life Insurance is the official life insurance of the Delenda S podcast. At Grim Reaper, they will unabashedly profit from your death. When you drop dead of a heart attack, a car accident, or from not drinking water for 36 hours straight, Grim Reaper will be there to take advantage of it. They will pay out money to your family, and through the sheer law of economics, will profit from your death. Don't listen to these life insurance companies that try to make things sound rosary. Give your money to Grim Reaper, where they will unabashedly profit from your death, but they'll be upfront about it. Go to grimreaper.com and use promo code DelendaEst.
Grim Reaper Life Insurance is not financially liable for any intentional termination inflicted on a person by that same person. In order to receive financial compensation from Grim Reaper, all fatalities must be unintended by the party upon which they are inflicted. See site for full legal details.
So today, we have elected to review what might go down as one of the most important, most insightful, most interesting and thought-provoking... No, that's not the movie. No, never mind. It's garbage. The Creator was a movie that...
Wow, that's a harsh take, dude. Wow, okay. Not even giving him the segment intro. You're just like, this movie's trash, dude.
I mean, am I wrong?
Okay.
No. But anyway,
By the way,
the Creator...
welcome to Spoiler Alerts, our section where we're going to review movies.
Welcome to
Steven just
Spoiler
hates the
Alert,
movie
by
this
the way.
much. He can't even give you the intro. He's just like, I hate this thing. Okay, I see how it is.
So The Creator is a robot movie that came out in September last year, and I was excited to watch it because it looked kind of interesting. And basically, the premise of the movie is that there are robots that look a lot like humans, and boy, what does that mean for humanity? Seb, take it away with a snippet from the official trailer of The Creator.
When the war started, they protected me. Took better care of me than humans would have.
They're not people, Maya. It's just programming.
10 years ago today, the artificial intelligence created to protect us detonated a nuclear warhead in Los Angeles.
Hot take, good riddance.
This is a fight for our very existence.
Sergeant Taylor, we are this close to winning the war. But the AI are developing a super weapon. Retrieve it. Or they win.
Did you locate the weapon?
Yeah, it's just a kid.
Okay, you get the gist of it. There's your trailer. It's real cinematic. The main character kind of looks like the protagonist from Tenet. So at first when I saw them, I thought it was the same actor. I was like, oh, that's gonna be the same actor. That wasn't the same actor. I'm like, all right, never mind.
It wasn't? I thought it was. I could be wrong, though.
I don't think, maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe I'm like racist because I can't tell the difference. I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I forget who the lead is in Tenet. He was great though. And honestly, the actor in this one did a good job. But that's not important. What is important is, ladies and gentlemen, as your resident film snob, it's time for me to complain about this film. Now, when Steven recommended this film for this episode's spoiler alert section, I had never watched it. My brother actually had mentioned it to me and said, oh, this looks maybe interesting. And I don't think either of us watched it. And so I watched it last night, and I have some thoughts. So, as Steven said, the basic premise is it's in the future, as you guys saw, a bomb goes off, and the Americans are trying to wipe out AI, okay? The evil white Americans are trying to wipe out AI. Oh, man, so sad. And basically you have this guy, right? And he is undercover with the robots, and then he's not. And he's working for the government, trying to get it back, and he's trying to find his wife in the middle of all this, and it's great. Those of you who have seen the movie know what I'm talking about. Those of you who haven't, you might be a little confused, but trust me, it's kind of more fun that way. All right, let's get into what I didn't like. And we have a few things. I have my main kind of issues, kind of the more substance of the film, but I do want to kind of just go at some practical plot issues first, because I feel like this movie thought it was really smart, and the plot just didn't work for me at a lot of points. So we're going to get into that. So, one, they go into the age-old Hollywood trope of pulling guys out of retirement without vetting them at all and putting them in the middle of top-secret, really sensitive, critical missions. Okay, so this guy had been on a mission. He'd been undercover with like the AI sympathizer people for like years, and there was an attack, and his wife got killed in the attack because he was actually a kind of an undercover agent. Kind of, he had married her, but he's really trying to find out her father, who's like the AI arch creator guy. It's a whole thing. Point is, his wife gets killed in the attack, which is a missile dropped from the Nomad station thing, that big thing you guys saw in the sky with the flashy lights in the trailer. We're gonna get into that later, trust me. So he's really traumatized. He's kind of bitter, and when they come to try to recruit him, he's like, "I don't really care if we go extinct from AI because they're gonna replace us. I don't really want to do this at all." And they basically tell him, "Well, there's a chance you can get your wife back if you do." He's like, "I'm in." No psychological testing. They have no idea really where this guy's loyalties lie. Like, let's just give him a gun and stick him in the middle of a, it'd be like this disgruntled Navy SEAL whose like wife got killed in an attack in Yemen. They're like, okay, so we're going to put you on the team to go try to assassinate this top secret terrorist leader. Great idea. It's not. Okay. Point is, also he like knows the layout of this secret underground bunker when he wasn't there before.
Yeah, somehow he
knows.
knows.
Whole thing. Anyway, so the Americans are like, all right, we got to find where the secret underground base is, where the AI is keeping this super weapon they're developing. Okay, so they send, all right, we're going to send in a spec ops team. We're going to sneak in, except they make no real attempt at stealth. They just kind of fly in with their spotlights. Just people just watching them like, oh wow, the Americans are here. That's crazy. They fly in, they land, no attempt at stealth, but they only bring like 12 guys in like what's the equivalent of a V-22 Osprey attack aircraft, right? It's like 12 guys and they get off. I'm like, okay, if you weren't going to be stealthy, you could have just brought like an entire army of guys. Like, I don't know. I just feel like you maybe could have done that. You could either be stealthy or you don't. I don't know. You're like, no stealth, but also only bringing 10 guys. Yeah. At one point, the scientists lock themselves in a room and they can't get in. They need to get in. And the guy's like, they need Face ID. And he goes, they need Face ID. I guess I'll just cut the face off this dead scientist right here. I'm like, well, you could have just picked him up and put his face
Okay, I
in
thought
front
the
of
same thing. I was like, that was gratuitous.
I know. All the like men watching this movie were like, well, that's not the most practical solution to that problem. Anyway, so also they find the base, they find where it is, and their idea is like, hey, we need to go plant charges in, like blow it up, and we need to like get the thing out and that kind of thing. I'm like, okay, you found the base, why don't you just like nuke it or drop a bunker buster on it? You just blow it up. You know where it is. You know it's underground. And as we saw, the like chamber where the secret weapon is not very far. It's like 10 feet underground. There are current American armaments that could obliterate that, no problem, right? So there's that. And then we get to, they call in Nomad, USS Nomad was like their weapon, their military space station, okay, to fly in and drop a missile to blow it up, right? Now, Nomad, as you guys saw in the trailer, is this big, giant, they say it's a space station, but it looks like it's at like maybe 5,000 feet.
Yeah, it can't make him smile.
It looks like
later in
it's
the
very
movie,
low
it's
down.
definitely in space.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe it just came down from orbit. I don't know. The point is, they said it was a $1 trillion project. It's changed the tide of the war. Over the course of the entire movie, I did not see the space station, the military capabilities of this station, do anything that current United States military tech can't do. Okay, they have like research labs on it and all that. Okay, great. You could put that on the space station, put it in space. I don't know why they couldn't have just used tech we have now. They certainly had then. That's a lot cheaper. Like, I remember I literally wrote in my notes when I'm watching this thing. I said, this is just a B-1B Lancer with more steps. Like, there's nothing. And it's like hovering there. It's very vulnerable. It reminded me of, if any of y'all have seen the Hunger Games, they have this hovercraft there. They're advanced. And then they get shot down with bow and arrows. And they're like the dumbest things ever. And you're thinking, we have planes right now that are like way more effective than those. We could have just sent an F-35 with a bunker-busting bomb. And this whole thing would have been way easier. Okay, but I digress. So there's that. Also, the U.S. military tactics are just awful throughout the entire movie. Like, they pull up in this ginormous tank. Like, literally, it's made of Star Wars, this huge, like, ground tank assault vehicle. And they're blowing up things, like, later in the movie, during the climactic battle.
It's pretty awesome, though.
And they're like, okay, and now we deploy the little robot with a bomb that, like, runs out, like, physically runs. And then it blows up. I'm like, you have a giant super tank thing. Just shoot them with the giant rockets that you were shooting before. Like, I don't know, one of like the 6 ginormous guns mounted on your huge tank. What? But no, I have to have the point about the sentient bomb, and then the little gal stops him. So there's that. Also, the climax of the movie is a big escape, basically, where they get out of kind of LA, and they go up and they destroy Nomad and save the robots, right? And it's great. The entire escape is utterly impractical, makes no sense. It hinges on the entirety of the U.S. Army not knowing the difference between a electronic device being switched to off and being switched to standby. Okay, that's the entire premise of the escape. Also, they're like, they're on that shuttle, they're going to Nomad. She's taking control of the shuttle. What can we do? I don't know, shoot it down. Like you've proven throughout the movie you have no problem with collateral damage, like zero. Just like shoot it down. Also, it docks to the space station. Like, what do we do? I'm like, I don't know, vent it into space because you can do that because you're on the space station and you have control of it. I don't know, crazy idea. So there's that. Okay. Also, the missile at the end, they're basically launching all these missiles to blow up all the remaining AI bases. Okay, and you have to stop them. And it's just the dumbest because they drop the bombs from the space station. They kind of like go out into missiles and they go off and they blow up. The thing is, they disable the space station before the bombs hit, so the bombs deactivate, which is
somehow
really dumb and less effective than using a current Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, which could do the exact same thing, except you blew up the submarine while the missile's in flight, they wouldn't stop flying. So, again, high-tech solution that's worse than what we currently have. Also, good luck finding an Ohio-class submarine. It's not hovering over the Earth on a giant platform. It's under the Pacific Ocean, and it doesn't matter. It's going to blow half your country off the map, right? And also has advanced targeting systems. It can do all of the same things. Also, I love the fact they're like, oh, the targeting system, we need to get all. I'm like, you didn't have these targeted for like 2 days? And they're like, they're going to blow up the space station. Quick, go ahead of the attack. I'm like, if you were ready to do it, why didn't you just blow them up anyway? So, all right, those are my points. So those are the plot points. And to kind of finish summarizing the plot, maybe I should have done before I did that. But the super weapon turns out to be this little girl who's like actually a robot. And she has super advanced AI, and she can control tech all around her. And the humans want her, and the Americans want her, and the AI sympathizer people want her, and they're all fighting over her. And the guy, she's actually like kind of the daughter of his wife, but they're both maybe robots. We don't really know. And it's a whole thing, and that's what the plot of the movie revolves around. Okay, so there's those plot issues. The bigger issues I had are basically the entire conflict of the film is built on a false premise of the fact that basically the conflict is like, who are we to, persecute robots? They're basically, what's the difference between them and us? I'm like, I don't know, you're a human being with a body and eternal soul, and they're not. End of story, period. I don't care about them.
Exactly.
There's that. But the entire thing is, they use a lot of evolution. There's these really annoying, supposedly artsy shots. There's like a person who will like pan over and there's like a monkey. And it's like, oh, get it? Because we're actually just evolved from monkeys and we're a superior species, just like the AI to humans. Oh, it's so profound. It's not. It's really stupid. Yeah, I wrote in my notes, I don't feel bad for the robots just because they have cute faces grafted onto them. It's still just a robot. I don't care if it looks cute. I also basically just reject this notion that the film posits of perfecting human nature, because basically, the robots are like, what'll happen when we win this war? What'll happen to the West? Nothing. We'll all live in harmony, right? This idea that basically the robots basically adapted all of the good parts of human personality and human nature and none of the bad parts.
Yes, while
being
created by humans.
Concept. Human nature, right? Human nature is not a malleable thing you can pick and choose from. It's not just it's a total film. It's a complete materialist evolutionist understanding of reality. Also, they uploaded a guy's consciousness for like a little bit in one part of it. The guy's dead. They put a brain scanner on him. They take a USB stick and stick it into a robot. And he's like, oh, am I dead? They're like, yeah, you're dead. You need to tell us what happened. He's like, oh no, and he freaks out and then he like dies. Like, oh, we only got 20 seconds of it. I'm like, wait, he was what? Now we can just upload consciousness? What is happening right now? So that was obnoxious. That's the theme of evolution and kind of competing species. Just if anyone has a basically utterly atheistic materialist worldview, there's just no tension in the film. They're there like, oh, it's this deep moral question. I'm like, no, it's not. Wipe them out. I don't care.
Right. Right.
And that's the entire thing. I also just, I was actively rooting for the Americans who are supposed to be the bad guys. I was wholeheartedly rooting for them the entire time. Like every time there's a Nomad missile strike, it's like the sad music. I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty sweet. I also couldn't, and for the same reason, I really was not invested in this main character or his various AI girlfriends, or like his wife, and then his like daughter, they're also robots. I wasn't that invested. Like if he had just gotten T-boned by a car and killed mid-film, I would have been like, okay, whatever. I didn't care because again, his entire arc, his entire reason he matters is based in this false premise of reality. So that was the main issues for me. The plus, so it ends with a few good things where I hand it off to you to continue. I will say it looked great visually. It was great. The acting was good. I mean, I wasn't like blown up, and my socks weren't blown off, but and I wasn't ever watching like that wasn't a good beat. I'm like, no, I thought it was good, solid acting, seamless. However, they made like the humans with the robotic parts, and then it looked great. I think it was a lot of practical effects, looked really good, and the idea for the film was at least somewhat original. So that was good, I thought. Yeah. So there's my takedown. If you didn't understand the context of all that, I'd say go watch the movie, but I think I rented it for like $6, no, $5.70 maybe on YouTube. Which, I mean, look, it's entertaining. There are worse films you could watch, so yeah, I mean, maybe I'd recommend watching it once, not twice, but if you want to go watch it once, go for it. Steven, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the production value was excellent. The visuals are fantastic, and I believe it was nominated for Academy Awards in that category. And I think the most interesting part about it is that it's filmed entirely on a $4,000 camera that you can buy at Best Buy, a Sony FX3, which is really cool, and you would never be able to tell the difference. So I thought that was really interesting. But as you were saying, philosophically, it's a complete, utter disaster. They use the man looking for his wife trope to pull you in. Like, that's their only real attempt at trying to get you to side with the main character. There's not a whole lot of backstory. It's just like, oh, he's looking for his wife, so you have to root for him. He's the good guy, and therefore the people he's working against are the bad guys.
His wife, who's also a robot. Okay.
Well, not until the end. She's a human, and we'll get into that later. She starts as a human. Yeah, so they basically that's how they get you on the protagonist side, and then the rest of the movie, as you were saying, operates on this assumed premise that robots are just the same as humans, and they provide no philosophical justification. They don't even try to differentiate robots from humans at all, except for like the weird off and standby, like basically asleep versus killed, just like differentiation, which was the weirdest thing ever. But the robots apparently eat, they sleep, but they still run on electricity. Like there's no attempt at making them different from humans.
They also they're like the only religious people portrayed in the film. The robots are like Buddhist robots. None of the people are religious, but
that's
the
true.
robots have religion. It's very weird.
They're somehow religious, so they just make no attempt to make them different at all from humans. And then by doing that, they just make the whole movie like a generic civil rights movie. Like, oh, we have these oppressed people, they're robots, but we told you that they're the same as humans, so you have to feel bad for them because, you know, they're being oppressed. And to that end, of course, every bad guy, every single one, is an evil white American. In fact, every single white person in the movie that I can remember correctly, was a bad guy, except for one who lasted about 10 minutes on screen when he was killed. So essentially, what could have been an interesting ethical investigation into AI and what AI is just becomes a generic civil rights film with no justification for why robots are people. And I mean, it just gets even weirder from there. So our main character literally mercy kills his wife, who, as you were saying, they thought she was killed in the Nomad missile strike, but it turns out she wasn't. And then he goes to sees her and she's in a vegetative state. So he just mercy kills her without, like, there's no discussion. He just does it. It's just fine. And then before she's dead for too long, the demon robot baby secret weapon thing uploads her consciousness into a USB stick. And then the main character runs a space station into the ground. The space station has a whole bunch of people on it. Probably kills a bunch of people just to save the poor robots. And then at the very end, the demon robot baby uploads his wife's brain into a robot that looks like her. And so I guess that makes her totally a human now. And he found love again. And it's great. It's all romantic as the space station is crashing to the ground. And, you know, again, the movie shoving into our faces that it's all the same. Humans and robots, there's no difference. And I guess my final
they also
takeaway
both
is
die like 2 minutes after being reunited. They're like, oh, my wife, I'm back. Boom, into the ground, and they're both dead. So
this is just Avatar with robots. And I didn't even like Avatar. And in both movies, I was actively rooting for the bad guys to blow something up, but I had an even better reason to do so in the creator because they were just robots. And obviously the creator, Delendam Est, must be destroyed.
So true.
it shows you that
Delenda est,
philosophically
as we say.
society is just totally out of control. We have no idea what makes us human. We have no idea what separates us from anything that looks like us and talks like us. They just rely on this functionalist view of the world that if one thing looks and sounds like another thing, then it just must be the same thing, which is it's just wrong on so many levels. It just shows you where we are as a society. We just have no conception of anything anymore.
I agree. Delenda est. And takeaway from this one, kids, is that materialism, it's bad, and you shouldn't adhere to it. Listen to Pius XI instead, and do the right thing. Become Catholic. I
Right.
think that's about all we have for this show. We are out of time for today, so we will see you next time on the next episode of Delenda est. See you later.